Hey guys, how are you tonight? It is John C. Morley here, serial entrepreneur, and welcome so much for tuning into IFYL Inspirations for Your Life. First, I do want to give a big shout out and a thank you to all of you wonderful people because, ladies and gentlemen, we have hit another milestone, and I am so grateful to share this with you. As of tonight, or depending when you're watching this, because it is January 17th, 2024, and it is Wednesday evening, but the podcast, as you know, comes out the day after. We've had several thousand downloads. We're up to 137,400 downloads. Wow, give ourselves a round of applause. That is absolutely amazing. But I do have another ask for you. Would you please go to the QR code or go to believemeachieve.com, check out all my great content, but check out my TikTok. We want to reach a few thousand people. And the reason is because I produce a lot of great content, a lot of great guests, and a lot of other things. And I want to go live and share things with you like baking and all kinds of other stuff. But I need you guys to follow me because TikTok has a little minimum requirement. Before we do get started, I do want to thank you, whether you're here at 8 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock in the morning, 12 noon, 12 a.m., or even 3 a.m. or 3 p.m. For those of you that don't know who I am, I'm John C. Morley, serial entrepreneur, and I am a podcast host and a podcast coach. And I'm a specialist in helping businesses tell a story that leads to them growing and being more scalable. And of course, that means more profitable. Now, I typically work with companies that do bring in 10 million or more, and they are passionate about learning their story. They either know it or they want me to find out who it is. So this entire week, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been following us, our master topic for the week that starts on Saturday is to understand the keys to your journey. We've been doing a lot about the journey. Tonight, we have a special guest, which I'll talk to you about in just a minute. Another guest. Our topic for the evening is really a cool one, is mastering the art of overcoming the quote unquote I'm not life mentality. And we're on series 3, which means we're in the third year. We're on show number 3 of that year, and we're on episode number 5. You remember there's always 7 episodes in the week. So on Friday will be our last episode for the week, and then we'll move over to a brand new show, which will be show 4. I have a gentleman that'll be joining me here in just a moment, and we're going to be hearing about his story. But the gentleman coming on, his name is Daniel Hodges. JD is an activist. He's dedicated to assisting others with disabilities and chronic illnesses to reach their full potential in life. While in law school, Daniel founded Pieces of Me Foundation, a nonprofit that promotes universal access and inclusion, a word I love. We've been hearing this word a lot, but it's not just a buzzword, ladies and gentlemen. It's important that we as employers, entrepreneurs, or even just people in family or friends understand what inclusion is. It means no discrimination for race, religion, sexual orientation, creed, color, and also for any kind of inability or disability. So that's really important. Daniel's perspective has been shaped by his experience as a blind man with chronic pain and other conditions. He has spent a lifetime surpassing the low expectations placed before him, and his personal calling is to help others to do the same. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the Inspirations for Your Life show tonight, Mr. Daniel Hodges. Hey, Daniel, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, John. Thank you for having me. We've been looking forward to having this conversation for a little bit now, and I'm so glad tonight's the night.
I am glad. I've been getting excited. We do a lot of prep for this. People think that, we just pull these shows out of nowhere, but we really work hard on the topics. They're not scripted, I will tell you that, but we do work hard to make sure that there's a master topic and that the guests fit into that master topic like a subtopic. So I guess I want to start out with this, and I'm going to just fire right off here. And that is when we talk about accessibility and disability. So first, I'll give you my perspective. Accessibility to me is the ability to be able to do something. Like if you're in a wheelchair, for example, and you want to get into, a building, whether it's a medical facility or perhaps it's just where you live. They're even training dogs right now that, no joke, that know how to put their paw on the button to open the door for the handicap accessible door. I think that blew me out of the mind. This is something they just started doing, I think, last year, because they said a lot of people, they either don't know how to press it or in their excitement to get in, they fall because they're excited that they're going to go in the building, but then they fall, unfortunately. So the dog keeps them and also makes sure the door is open and does things like that. But so that's accessibility. A disability is when someone's not able to do something. And I'm going to give a quick synopsis on this. So many of you guys know I broke my tib and fib about 7 years ago. 6, 7 years ago. It's not the first time I broke something. I broke something about back when I was a kid, when I was probably I think it was in, basically it was before I was even in school. I broke all the way up, both legs up to the waist, had a cast on both legs. My dad had to carry me into the crib and don't remember that too well. And then after that, in kindergarten, my dad asked me if I want to go riding on a bike. Here's the moral of this story. If your dad asks you to go riding on a bike, make sure there is a proper seat on that bike. Now, he wanted to put the seat on. I was very anxious to get on the bike, and it wasn't his fault. I sat on there. I said, "Oh, I'll be fine, Dad. We don't have to put the seat on. It'll be fine." And again, I was in kindergarten. I could hack it, just go on the bike for a little bit. Well, he put me on the back. He told me to hang on tight, and I did. And all of a sudden, without giving you all the details of the gruesomeness, I started to slightly scream because my left foot, my ankle, got caught into the spokes and healed all that without surgery. But the reason I say that to you is that wasn't really the disability. About 6, 7 years ago, I loved skiing. I was an intermediate skier. They handed Hunter Mountain over to their grandkids. But instead of doing something like investing in money, the kids didn't know about money. They didn't know about skiing. They didn't know about anything. So what they did was they handed it over to them, and they should have closed the mountain. I got on the regular green mountain. I said, let me go to the blue one because the green one was icy. And as I got midway down, I tried to pivot my left ski after maybe my third or fourth pivot, and it locked. And I was so grateful, not that, but that when my tib and fib broke, I didn't know this at the time, my pain was all blocked out. When I got to the hospital, they asked me what was my social drug of preference. Now, I was a little insulted because I don't do drugs, smoke or anything, but they were so onto that. But here's the part about the disability. Really comes to my accessibility. So I took for granted that I could get in my car. I took for granted I could do all these things. But so when I had this cast on my leg that had my tib and fib, I wasn't able to drive, obviously. So my left foot, which would be the one that should be doing, basically is in the car there. And even though you're going to say, well, gee, you use your right foot, you're supposed to just use the right back and forth. I still couldn't get in the car, being able to move around. And I was basically taking myself, no crutches, between a wheelchair and I'd have to say kind of like a walker. Those were the two things I was using. And when I had to get a bus like Dial-A-Ride at the time, it was amazing because all this time I never realized what had to go through. Like I had to be buckled in for safety and all these things that you kind of just take for granted. I couldn't do for myself. I didn't know how to buckle a wheelchair into a bus. I had no idea. But the thing that really got me was during my disability that was temporary, some people were on there permanently with a disability. And everybody on the bus was very nice to me. But the people off the bus that didn't have the disability were not nice. They were very impatient with me. People that were always patient in my job and my business and friends of mine, they were always patient with me, but they were so impatient because I had a disability and it was hurtful. So I didn't say anything to them. But when I got better, which was from February 28th to June 12th, and my leg healed, I said, guys, why were you treating me like a second-class citizen? I mean, like, oh, John, you're fine now. I said, yeah, but you made me feel like, you know what? Because I couldn't move around like you did. I broke my, yeah, well, it was just a pain waiting for you. Well, I know that I came back and I did fine, but are you like this to other people that might have a disability? And it's like, well, John, I never thought about that. I said, well, just ask yourself a question. Next time you go somewhere, are you impatient because somebody has a wheelchair or because somebody has some type of ability that is going to impede you from getting something done faster? And he got back to me, says, I don't know. A day or two later, he called me back and says, he says, yeah, he says, you were just in that bracket for a while. Oh, so I just got in that bracket. He's like, yeah, you got in that lucky unbracket. I said, well, that's a terrible thing to say. And he said, well, it wasn't against you. It was just the fact that you were taking so much longer than what were you going to call me? Well, I said, go ahead, tell me what you're going to call me. Well, and I was a little upset with this. He says, well, a normal person. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. I said, I'm not normal. Well, you know what I mean. I mean, you just didn't have all your faculties. So now I don't have my Well, no, you're twisting my words. Well, what are you saying? I'm saying that I guess I was impatient because you're normally a lot faster. And now when I had to wait for you, I just got upset because it took twice as long. But how did that make somebody feel that can't get rid of that disability? He's like, I never thought about that. So that's my take on accessibility and disability. And one of the greatest things they're doing right now, I'm trying to bring them on a show. Some people, whether they're blind, whether they don't have touch, whether they don't have senses in their hands very well, they have a faucet on the market. And I'm trying to get the company to come on the show. I've been working on this for a few years because I think it'd be really great. The faucet turns on, whether it's automatic or not, doesn't matter. But the faucet has the color of red and blue. When the water color coming out is blue, very dark blue, it's cold. When the water is closer to the red, it's warm. When it's hot, it's red. So it mixes through. So it's a great way of giving people an indicator because people may not necessarily know that they're going to burn themselves. And that's my take on disability. What do you have to say about that, Daniel?
Yeah, I think you encapsulated it well. And, we oftentimes think about disability as being physical or sensory. And, when you start talking about non-apparent disabilities, which actually comprise 80% of the disabled population, then you start, getting even deeper into some of those really tricky questions. For instance, you see somebody who's able to park their car in the handicap spot and then walk into the store. And, we've kind of been conditioned to say, well, socially, should I go, key their car or whatever? And the answer is a resounding no, because the reality of the matter is they may very likely have, arthritis or some other thing going on that fully qualified them for that sticker, and it's just not apparent to the outside. So much of this, like you said, it's perceptual. It's learning to be, it's learning to meet people where they are, and it's learning to be a little bit more self-conscious of how we treat other people. Kindness goes a long way, and I think this is going to parlay later on in the conversation into talking about, coming into our own and learning how to differentiate your worth from how people treat you. And we're going to get into that later on, but I want to plant that seed here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just bring a point up here. I think it's really important is that, according to John Foy and Associates, who's a personal injury law attorney, the musculoskeletal system and connective tissue is made up of 29.7% of all people receiving Social Security disability benefits from. So the skeletal system includes things like the bones, the ligaments, the cartilage, and other connective tissue, which if we didn't have them, well, then we really couldn't get around and do what we do in our meat suit every day. The musculoskeletal system can have connective tissue and disorders like arthritis, fibromyalgia, spine disorders, scoliosis, ruptured discs, carpal tunnel syndrome, degenerative discs. And as we mentioned before, there's things like even mood disorders like bipolar disorder, which is 12.9% of the people receiving social disability, major depressive disorder, glycolytic disorder, seasonal affective disorder, persistent depressive disorder, depression related to mental illness, premenstrual dysphoric disorder is another one. And then there's a whole bunch that affect the nervous system. These are things like the brain, spinal cord, sensory organs, like we were talking about. If you can't feel whether you're being burned, I think that's a really, really big problem. And according to Johns Hopkins Medicine, we all know them very well, there are several that affect the nervous system. Infections like meningitis, polio, functional disorders like epilepsy and neuralgia, degenerative disease like multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's, structural disorders like Bell's palsy, brain or spinal cords, and yes, guys, there's even intellectual disabilities. And according to the American Association on Intellectual and Development Disorders, that's the AAID, say that a million times fast, that's the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disorders. And the limitations there are learning and reasoning, problem solving, adaptive behavior. And then we have things that include things like Fragile X syndrome, developmental delays, Down syndrome, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and a Prader-Wills syndrome. And this is just a few to name, but I think a lot of people think a disability has to be something that we physically see. I mean, I learned not too long ago that there are, and I don't want to say classify, but the only reason they classify, because I'm not really for that concept of stigmatizing or classifying or tagging, they do it for a legal reason. So if somebody drives, they're considered this step. If they're this, then they're functioning well enough. I'll give you an example. It could be autism. And somebody who is a very functioning autism person can drive. Another one can't. So I think the most important thing I've learned, I've always been sensitive to it, but I think I've learned to be more sensitive to the fact that, not only how you are respectful to the people, and that goes well beyond the fact of opening doors and letting them go before you, things like it goes more of having an empathy of what they're going through. And you should never try to say, hey, I know what you feel like. Now, I know what it's like to have a broken leg, but I am not going to try to say, hey, I know what it's like to have, I don't know. And so I think that's the most important thing, is not to assume that we know what it feels like. Even I had somebody the other day who passed away. I said, I've had my grandfather pass away when I was only in second or third grade of Thanksgiving. I said, so I know what that feels like, but I am not going to even try to say that I know what it feels like to have a brother pass away, because I don't. Does that make sense, Daniel?
It does. And to your point, regarding the orthopedic disabilities, it's interesting how we look at this, because, understanding Social Security law the way that I do, I can tell you that orthopedic disabilities, particularly from that source, are going to be grossly underreported, simply because the regs regarding how one gets approval for disability vis-a-vis an orthopedic disability are still not caught up to the reality of what can necessarily impact life. So I think we look at these statistics as being informative and instructive, and then we can take them a step further and say there's still a lot we don't know, and that's on the macro level as well as the micro level, which I think ties into your last point of, we've been taught to shy away from the topic of disability for the risk of being impertinent or impolite, and certainly there are times where it's appropriate to let it go, but I think there are other times where genuine connection happens when we learn to be comfortable with one another, including our differences. And so what I tell people is, when you're skeptical of what I can do, that's usually not a great start. When you're curious about what I can do, or more importantly, how I do it, if you want to know what it's like to go through law school without being able to read a printed book, I can tell you about electronic books and all these other things, and it's going to highlight alternative techniques. It's going to destigmatize disability, as opposed to putting an even further wedge into the conversation.
You bring a very good point up there, Daniel. Whether it was myself breaking a leg, whether it's somebody that has a temporary disability or a permanent disability from either an accident or something they're born with, or something that happens because of an accident that causes permanent damage, or some type of a heredity situation, I think it's important to understand that, there are other ways. And I think it teaches us to be resourceful, right? When we always try to do something one way, Like, for example, they always say there's more ways to do something than another. So it could be something as simple as learning. And I know this because I spent a lot of time studying and doing psychology and studying learning disabilities and things like that. And what I found out is that just because you can't learn one way, there are other ways you can learn. There's auditory, there's visual, there's kinesthetic.
Yeah.
And a lot of the teachers, professors, they're lazy. They don't want to do more work because they're not getting paid more money. So I think it comes down to a whole concept that people are sad. It's sad that people actually act this way. And I know that it's not what they mean to do. Just like my friend didn't mean to be mean to me. And so what I did to him when he told me that is I said, I want to do something to show you something. He said, no, I get it. I said, no, I just want to do something for a minute. I said, I want you to take, just take a cloth and I want you to cover your eyes. Black cloth, just cover your eyes. So what are we doing? I said, just cover your eyes. Okay, so what's the point? I can't see. Exactly. I said, so now what I want you to do is I want you to go get something to eat in the fridge, just like you did before with your eyes open. And he looks at me, he says, are you nuts? I said, no. I said, people do this every day. He says, well, how do I do it? I said, well, you can get any kind of help you want. And he's like, so he started taking like very baby steps. And he's like, I need some kind of assistance. So I said, well, if you want, you can lean on me and I can guide you there. And I said, you can start feeling the edges and know where it is and I can kind of show you. And he's like, this is a lot of work. I said, there are people, Michael, that do this every single day of their lives. So don't you think it's time that maybe we should have just maybe an ounce more empathy for these people? Because now you can take that cloth off your eyes. People can't.
Absolutely. And, it's always a tricky thing when we talk about disability simulations because, we want to develop empathy. And, one thing I like about what you do is what you did in that example is you had the pathway laid out for success. When we start talking about simulations where failure is the outcome rather than success, then we start making people even more afraid of disability, as opposed to when success is the outcome, the projected outcome. Then we say, wait a minute, like you said, this can be done. It's done by people all the time, and then you start to actually enter into again that sense of curiosity and wonder. And I'm going to tie this to what you were saying about the professor earlier. It's my experience that the professor who doesn't want to open up their classroom to people with disabilities, whether it be intellectual, developmental, or sensory, to some professors, I'm just as much of a pain in the backside because I can't see the blackboard as somebody else is because of whatever else. Those are generally the ones who are kind of in that funk of saying, well, I've done this for decades. I don't want to do it any other way. And voila, you discover really what they're stuck in is this complete aversion to innovation of any kind. And if you flip that coin over, you say, wait a minute. Sometimes accessibility is the catalyst for astonishing innovations, not just for our community, but really that benefit the entire community, disabled or not. And so how we frame this conversation, how we frame our outlook, really does have the potential to either go in a very negative or an extremely positive direction.
I think what's really important with what you're saying there is that a lot of these teachers think that they're making it easy. So I'll take it. Maybe you're someone that has a learning disability, and we'll take it from that. Now, learning disabilities are different than other disabilities like the ADA, but they're similar characteristics. They're not exactly the same, but there are some similarities. For example, if you're in a class and you can't comprehend the blackboard, he can't see the blackboard, very similar situation, then the law states, most people don't know that there's a law. So you either have to be tested as learning disabled, that's number one. If you have a classified ADA disability, which is the reason for classifying it so that people don't, let's say, just kind of flow through the system that shouldn't be getting accommodations. So we have people that, let's say, can't see the board or can't take notes. So, okay, the law says you're allowed to use a digitized recorder or to record the lessons as long as you get his or her permission. And so these are different types of accommodations. Maybe it's things like, I can't take notes, but the accommodation might be the fact that the professor will either give me his notes or he will pick somebody in the classroom that I'll get their notes. Might say, well, gee, why do I get that accommodation? Other people don't. It's because you might not have that step to be set up for success. So like you mentioned before, failure really, by the way, isn't failure. If you quit, you failed. If you do something and you think you failed, but you keep going, you have not failed yet. Okay? You might have gotten tired, you might have gotten frustrated, but as long as you don't quit, you have not failed. I always say, and this comes from training I've got a long time ago from Mr. Thomas Hopkins, I never see failure as failure, but only as a game I must play to win. I never see failure as failure, but a chance that I have to make myself laugh. I never see failure as failure, but only as an opportunity to learn to become better. And there are more. But I think it's all in our mentality because what we put as our end game, I do a lot of races and head of security for a lot of things from New York Marathon to other marathons. And they have different races where people don't have the ability to run. They don't have legs, so they do it with their hands. So what I always believed in our Creator, and this isn't a religious show, but I am religious. For those of you that are watching, I'm Roman Catholic. If the Creator, if you don't have a skill, I believe the Creator sharpens another skill of yours. So if you don't have, let's say, sight, then your hearing is striked more, is kind of geared up more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I think getting into the idea that we are who we are, not by accident, and we can get and we can we can look at it from a religious or from a non-religious point of view. Like yourself, I happen to be religious as well, so
okay.
I personally feel like it is no accident that I was born blind, nor is it an accident that I have, some of the other things I've experienced, including the pain. And, I feel like as I have been able to fold the positive elements into my identity, it has really helped me understand who I'm meant to be and what I'm capable of, despite, some of the very toxic messaging that can be out there.
You bring a good point, and we were talking before about disability. So there's something called they love acronyms, the government. The ADA.gov is something you can actually check out. And there is a whole bunch of things you can read out. I won't bore you with all that here, but there's things like disability employment programs, and it is the law, ladies and gentlemen. People say, oh my gosh, well, I have a disability, I can't get hired. And I'll never forget this. When I was doing my Eagle Scout project many years ago, I didn't want to paint curbs. I didn't want to build a birdhouse or a tree house. I wanted something that was going to have a memory from my life and many others. So I decided we had a place at the time I lived in Wayne, New Jersey, and there was a place called the Wayne Handicap Foundation. And there was a gentleman there who I became friends with, had been going there, I had been learning about it, didn't even know that I wanted to do something for them. But I did after I became friends with this guy, Gene. He's since passed away. And I decided that I was going to do a holiday party. So I wrote to the different companies that made soaps and deodorants, and we wrapped them. We had Santa Claus come. But what they were is a day place where people with any disabilities could come, and they could do things like packaging, things that would still give them a purpose. I think the most important thing for anybody, whether it's a disability, whether it's minor, whether it's major, I think the most important thing, Daniel, is that people feel that they have a purpose and that they can contribute to our world.
Absolutely. And what I tell people is, for instance, we'll bring it back to vision loss here for a second. If I were to say that, X% of the difficulties I run into related to vision are, intrinsic to the actual loss of eyesight, most people would venture to guess that that number is well over 50%, maybe approaching 100. And what I would say is actually it's closer to 30. And the
Okay.
remaining 70% is structural, it's attitudinal, it's, really it's the perceptions that are out there. And to me, that ties into not only how I try to live my life, but how I try to help others, because I found through the crucible of some really difficult moments in my life, particularly, about 5 years ago, that I could take my story and I could help other people find not only their purpose, but their genius, their skill set, what they're able to do that no one else can. And to me, that is a gift I enjoy being part of and really sharing, because hope is the antecedent for so many of the things that we run into.
It's kind of the reason, like, people say they live longer. If you have a passion in life for something and you love something, I believe you're going to live longer. If you have that desire. But I want to just go to one thing before I ask you a question, and that is with the ADA. So the ADA has broken this down. So for those of you who don't know what the ADA is, we talked about it briefly, but I just want to give you a little insight. This is very important. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act is what it stands for. So they have something called the Introduction to the ADA, which is basically how ADA is structured and how you protect people whose rights with disabilities. What is really a service animal? Because we see a lot of people bring dogs in, but they're not service animals. And how do they assist people? Parking. There are certain things out that the ADA requires businesses and nonprofits and state, local governments to provide certain accessible parking spaces and entrances and ramps and elevators and all kinds of things. And then there's effective communication. People with certain disabilities might not be able to communicate the way you and I can. They might need to do teletouch. They might need the extra accommodations on websites. Pretty soon that's going to become required, where websites are going to have to be ADA accessible. So my question to you, Daniel, is we've been talking about this whole thing, and we've been teasing Peel about this. So what is the I'm not life? Why don't we want to live the I'm not life?
So to me, the I'm not life is settling for whatever happens to be expedient rather than what we want to go for. Because, like you mentioned earlier, we're afraid of failure, or we're afraid of finding our limits. And then we convince ourselves that the voices outside of ourselves that tell us what we can't do must be right. And we give in to that pressure, rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to go find what my limits are, and I'm going to enjoy the ride while I'm at it.
So the most important thing I'm hearing you say is that it's not about the destination, which I've many times said. It's about enjoying the journey. It's not about where we're going, but it's just enjoying the process along the way, which I think a lot of people are always so busy worrying about where they're going that they're not enjoying how they're doing things. But I think it's hard for some people to embrace the fact that, it's not the way they want it today, or maybe somebody new with a disability. Letting people know that there are support systems out there from the ADA, and they're not alone. There are groups, there are meetups, and there are programs, in fact, to actually help you get a job that are required by law and that have funding. If you're trying to get to a certain building and you can't because they don't have elevators, certain buildings are required to provide accommodation for you. So I think there's a whole confusion for some people that, it doesn't affect me because I don't have it. It's not a I have it, you have it. It's an understanding of, I'll call it in one sense, a cultural correctness thing. Because even though it's more than that, if we have somebody from another country and we shake their hand a certain way, they take the disrespectful. People in our world don't want to be disrespectful to people who have disabilities, just like my friend didn't when I had it. But yet he acted in a manner that made me feel like a jerk, that made me feel like almost to the point where I'm doing this, and literally the point where I was going to break down and cry. I'm like, I'm just going to stay here at my chair. I'm just going to stay here if I fall. I'm not going to ask for any help, and I'm just going to stay here. And that was how I was for my first, I think it was my first couple weeks. If I fell or something happened, I didn't ask for any help. And that was because everybody that I asked for help either would make fun or they were too busy. So I said, the heck with these people. I'm just going to either stay on the floor or I'll eventually get up. But then what wound up happening is some people started coming to me that actually had some true compassion. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that, you're different than me is how they look at it. And so this is why I say the glasses you put on, and if you have an experience, walk in that person's shoes for just a day, or how about just an hour? I had my friend do it for 5 minutes. Walk in that person's shoes for that time and tell me that you can't have empathy or understanding. It's not about, that person getting priority. It's not about priority. It's about a respect. It's about an ethics. We are kind and respectful to people, when maybe they're sick or something like that. This isn't sick, but this is a different thing. It's something that needs some assistance. And I feel as society, one of our missions is to help those around us if they need help. I'm not saying you have to volunteer somewhere, but I'm just saying that if you see somebody and they need help, pick up something for them, help them. And I think this is the thing I see our world missing right now. Everyone's so busy in their own stuff that they don't have the time to help somebody.
Absolutely. And I think it's important, maybe right at this moment, to differentiate from empathy, like you said, from pity. Pity is in its own way, it's condescending. It's really almost reinforcing the I can'ts and I won'ts and I'm not worthies, and it drives people further into their shell. And it's also fragile. It's what leads to abandonment. Whereas empathy is an investment. It's saying, I'm going to invest in you because I think there's more potential there, and I want to see what happens, and I want to see that growth. It's more sustainable, it's more longitudinal, and really it creates more abundance for everyone involved. So I think it's really important to kind of bear that in mind when we're talking about the ADA, or even just cultural correctness, as you said. It's not just about the recipient. It's about being able to bring everyone to the table in a way that they are able to be their best selves, live their best lives, and put back into the world every ounce of what they're capable of putting back into the world, so that we can keep the ball going down the field.
Exactly. And I think there's two important words here. Empathy is the one we're talking about. There's another one called compassion.
Yeah.
And so these get confused oftentimes. So compassion is having an understanding. Somebody passed away, you have an understanding. Okay. You have some respect. That's compassion. Like, you're respectful. That's compassion. Empathy is something a lot of people, especially strangers, don't want to do for another. It's when you put yourself in their shoes and you feel what it's like when they're going through. Somebody passes away, and you just, if you didn't have anybody, you put yourself in those shoes and you're like, for a moment you figure, well, gee, if that happened to me, how would I feel? And a lot of people don't want to get into empathy because they're like, oh, I'm just too busy. Like, I don't have time. But they will do compassion. But I always think like compassion is like, I don't know. I think compassion is more like, I'll call it a name here. I'll call it like the dollar store. It's like the cheap thing to do. Compassion is being respectful, but not a lot of people offer empathy. And I think that's the biggest problem when we talk about a disability, when we talk about anything, could be a relationship or any problem. But when we talk about the I'm not life, I guess the big thing I want to say to you, when you mentioned pity, it's okay for you to have pity for a few moments for yourself and then get away from that. So if you want to have a pity party for 5 or 10 minutes, go at it. Go have the pity party. Okay. And then it's over. Like, no more. Because I found that sometimes getting those emotions out of people can actually help them clear up the way for the good emotions to come in.
Absolutely. And, um, you know, I remember back in 2017, right before I applied for law school, or right before I started the law school journey, applying and all of those other things, I was, just a few weeks post divorce. I was a handful of weeks post femur surgery where they had literally had to break the femur and restabilize it, and I was having some pretty severe anxiety as well, and there's no getting around that those things hurt both physically and medically, psychologically, spiritually. They do. But when we are able to acknowledge and say, okay, I feel this pain, I'm going to acknowledge it, but I'm not going to stay here, then that's what opened the door for the next round of blessings to come. And then, a year later, I was in law school. I was starting down my journey. Year after that, in 2019, had another really serious mental health breakdown. Very, very serious mental health breakdown. And again, there was no not feeling that. But when I found the strength, and again, in my case, to pray about it and say, okay, I am in the kind of pain mentally I can't that I just can't handle. And somewhere along the way in that prayer, there was a plea for something to come into my life that would allow me to channel my energy and to focus on that rather than the pain I was feeling. That answer didn't come that night or the next day or even the next week, but about 10 days later, give or take, is when I found myself sitting on my cousin's couch in Arizona and discovered that she needed something just as badly as I did. And thus you had pieces of me come around because, again, we found a way to take that pain and even sometimes that self-pity and say, okay, we could channel this into a way to create something incredible that will help lift others out of where they're at, because we want to make sure that they have resources and they have tools and they have hope that sometimes we didn't always have. So you start creating a pay it forward kind of mentality based on some really tough moments.
Pay it forward is a great thing. And when we can take that pain, or I want to not call it pain, I want to call it discomfort. I know we talk about it as pain, but I remember from a doctor a long time back, and I think it was wisdom surgery. And it wasn't what I consider painful, but everybody I talked to said it was going to be painful. So when I had that mentality, of course, it was very scary. When the doctor told me it was going to be a discomfort, that put me at ease a little bit. So I think our words are very different. He said, you're not going to be in pain. You're going to be in discomfort. You're going to be in some discomfort. And we don't mind being in discomfort because we know discomfort is short term. One of the things I found that works really good with any type of discomfort is take the discomfort you have and go ahead and give it a color. Okay? Focus wherever it is and give it a color. Give it a shape. Give it a size. And just notice the texture. What's it about? And just kind of look at it. And after a second or two, a few minutes, and like, Okay, has the color changed? Has it gotten any dimmer, any brighter? Has the size changed? And what you'll notice is that as you start to give these feelings or these discomforts um, assignments to properties like colors, shapes, which these things don't have discomfort. So when you give it an association to that, your brain works more on trying to figure out that, and it takes it away from the discomfort that you're actually feeling. So my question is, as we've been talking about the I'm not life, which obviously nobody wants to live. My question is, because we only have a little bit more time left, and then we do have to wrap up. Am I living the I'm not life? How can we tell if I'm living the I'm not life? What's a good way to tell, Daniel?
And I'm going to say, in all likelihood, we all are to some degree, and becoming aware of that. Becoming aware of that is the first tool to identify where we're living the I'm not life. So I thought about this as I was preparing for our conversation earlier today, and where I have broken that mold academically. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough at studying. I broke that, even though I was told all throughout my life I would, never be able to, blind people like me don't go to school and, do all these things. Law school was never supposed to be in the equation. Guess what? I did it. So I broke that version of the I'm not life. I broke another version of, well, I don't know that I'm a business person, so how can I start a nonprofit? Well, I did it. We've been around for going on 5 years. COVID and all these other things, we made it. Apparently, I've broken that. But, I'm not lovable. Ooh, that's a tougher one. That's a tougher one when you've had a tough reality growing up with some family and other friend dynamics and stuff. You have a product of a divorce, and you start to say, okay, am I still in the I'm not lovable phase when it comes to my dating life and trying to find, a wife at some point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I probably am. And I'm less there than I was a year or 2 or 5 years ago, but I'm still growing through that to become more and more empowered and saying I am, but it's a process. And it's a process
It's
that's
like
meant to be.
it's a journey that you're on as well. It's another journey, and
Yeah.
it's like little milestones you're taking as preparing for a run. People say, John, don't go run 20 some miles. Go run 1 mile. Go run 2 miles. And I've come to the determination this year that I may not be ready to run the marathon in October, which is okay. I'm accepting that. I might need another year, but the fact of going from no running to running is an accomplishment. So I think we have to kind of pat ourselves on the back. But I do want to
Yes.
get into our last topic because we only have a few more minutes left. And how do I stop living the I'm not life? So one thing I want to say about this is the I'm not life, and it could be from I'm not lovable, whatever it is. It comes from you and your belief. So if you want others to love you or like you have to first like and love yourself. So when you say, I'm not this, I'm not that, you have to first give yourself love, give yourself like, give yourself intelligence, give yourself whatever it is. And then that will be projected to other people. Now, you don't do it for that reason. You do it because you're important. And then that will radiate out of you. And people will be like, huh. The best way I tell people to not live the I'm not life is no one has the right, and I want to say this again, no one, again, I said no one has the right to make you feel inferior about yourself except for one person,
Yep.
you. Now, you shouldn't put yourself down. So, and if somebody's giving you negative energy, if somebody's not treating you right, I have a very simple way to handle this. And it's not rude, it's doing what I need to do for John. And first of all, it's saying no. But if people, maybe you have people you meet, and for whatever reason, they're always blowing you off or they're not there. I said, look, I know you're busy. This has happened. Look, I get it. But if you don't want to do this again, just let me know. Like, we'll do it when you're ready. And they keep doing it. And then you're like, okay, look, maybe my time's not valuable to you. You just kind of just hope that I'm something better didn't come up. So you're hanging out with me. So if this doesn't something you really want to do, maybe we shouldn't hang out anymore, because I really don't want to hang around negative people. They do it again. I'm like, okay, if you keep doing this, like you do this again, we're done. And then they go back and I said, what happened? Well, we had an emergency. Okay, I get it. So I think maybe you probably should take some time for yourself, because we're done. Like, we're done. You got to love yourself enough to, again, this is not being rude or disrespectful. It's telling others that you value yourself. And I think that's one of the most important things to stop living the I'm not life. I'll give you a couple minutes and then we do have to wrap up. Dan, so tell me what you believe we should do to stop living the I'm not life.
Gonna conclude with 4 quick thoughts here in succession. Number 1, identify the areas, plural, in which you have these tendencies. We all do. Number 2, identify one that you want to start with that you feel is powerful enough to motivate you and where you'll see tangible benefits. Number 3, give yourself grace, understanding that the process of breaking the cycle takes time, and it's going to be fraught with starts and stops and progress and regression and progress again. Number 4, like you just said, surround yourself with people who are helping you look up towards where you're going instead of down towards where you've been. You do those 4 things, you'll get into the habit, and you will learn to stop fearing failure, stop fearing what you think you're not capable of doing, and you will get excited about finding your limits, because it's an incredible ride to be able to say, I don't know what I'm capable of. I don't need to know. I just know whatever I do, I'm going to really enjoy learning about myself and learning about the world and figuring out what I can accomplish in this life.
If you get up every morning, or you get up during the day, or whatever it is, and you feel good about your life, that's a great sign. If you're saying, oh, I can't believe this, I can't believe that, then change it. You have the ability to change your life. So if you don't like the way you feel, you don't like the way your life's going, change it. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. I hope all of you guys have enjoyed. We've spanned things about overcoming the I'm not life. We went through a lot of stuff here. We went through, what is accessibility and disability? What is the I'm not life? Am I living the I'm not life? How do I stop living the I'm not life? And if any of you guys are watching this program and saying, hey, I can't do this, well, the first thing you have to do is change that belief. Daniel, I do want to thank you very much for joining. I know we planned this a while ago. I think it was very beneficial. I think everyone will get a lot of value out of this. Is there anything you'd like to share with my listeners and viewers before we do close tonight?
Again, we didn't get very much into this story, but I've been there. I'm not telling you guys to do anything I haven't had to do myself. I've been bullied. I've been made fun of. I've been told all the many different ways that people think I'm not capable of doing hardly any of the things I've done in my life. And if I can do it, absolutely you can do it. Find that purpose, find that passion, take that first step. Feel free to reach out on social, because I'm here to help, I'm here to serve. But regardless, if you're just hearing this, know that your circumstances and your characteristics do not define your potential. Go forth and conquer.
And you guys, ladies and gentlemen, can start right now, whether it's tonight or tomorrow. There's no need for you to put this off. We do need to close because we have to wrap up, but I do want to thank Daniel for spending time with us this evening. And again, if you have questions for him, be sure to reach out to him. Be sure to check out all our other great content and go to believemeachieve.com, scan that QR code, and how about give me some love? How about following us? We want to reach over 1,000 so we can start streaming this show live to TikTok. But I need your help. We have 150,000 people watching us. Come on, what's a few thousand on TikTok? You guys can do that for me, right? Sure you can. Have yourself an amazing rest of your night. And tomorrow, we'll have another great show about, understanding the keys to your journey. What will it be about? you're going to have to stay tuned because I'm not going to tell you. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.